Let's kickstart the newscast with all the latest coming in from the United States, as US President Donald Trump has now warned that he will send federal troops to some major US cities amid the Black Lives Matter protests. Trump's announcement came as feds cracked down on anti-racism demonstrators in the city of Portland. The US president said that the protests have been turning unruly in some of the cities. Listen in to what the US president had to say.
These cities. More federal law enforcement, that I can tell you. In Portland, they've done a fantastic job. They've been there 3 days, and they really have done a fantastic job in a very short period of time. No problem. They grab them, a lot of people in jail. They're leaders. These are anarchists. These are not protesters. People say protesters. These people are anarchists. These are people that hate our country, and we're not going to let it go forward. And I'll tell you what, the governor and the mayor and the senators out there, they're afraid of these people. This is worse than Afghanistan, by far. This is worse than anything anyone's ever seen. All run by the same liberal Democrats. And you know what? If Biden got in, that would be true for the country. The whole country would go to hell. And we're not going to let it go to hell. Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the riot police were seen firing rubber bullets at protesters in Portland. The presence of federal law enforcement officers has escalated tensions between the security forces and demonstrators. The heavy use of force has not deterred people from joining in the protests, which have been going on for 53 days. Meanwhile, protests in Seattle went out of control as several demonstrators were seen vandalizing properties. A group of demonstrators disrupted Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' press conference in Orlando. Protesters accused DeSantis of lying to the public. The Florida governor said that the state will not be defunding police as deputies escorted some of the protesters outside the building.
And we will not be defunding the police, so don't worry about that. We're going to be supporting our men and women in law enforcement.
Situation clearly looking very grim out there. For more details, let's quickly go across to our correspondent Jagriti Dave, who's joining me live from Washington, D.C. at this hour. Jagriti, let's begin by gauging the severity of the fresh clashes. What's the situation on ground zero in Portland, New York and Chicago especially?
Yes, well, you look at Portland and there have been accusations of federal officers firing tear gas at protesters, taking people into unmarked cars, appearing in unmarked cars, detaining people without any good reason. And local officials are saying that the presence of these federal officers is making things worse. These officers are there, have been deployed as part of President Trump's executive order protecting statues that he signed last month. They come from a variety of agencies, including ICE and Customs and Border Control, and lots of reaction really to their presence there. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi describing them as unidentified stormtroopers who are kidnapping protesters.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned the presence of these federal agents, because I was just about to come to that. Local officials have also complained that federal agents, some of who are even Homeland Security agents, are not well trained in de-escalating violence, since they tackle a variety of crime like narcotics, weapons smuggling, as well as transnational gang activity. What explains the president's decision to involve federal agents?
Well, this is clearly a strong line that the president has taken on the toppling of statues and other signs and symbols across the country as part of the protests that have been taking place since the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis in May. And the president has really taken a hard line, calling his support for Confederate symbols, which many protesters say is a mark of the historic racism in America America, but which President Trump has said is a mark of pride in the South among people who say fly the flag, fly the Confederate flag. And it's as a result of the need for many of the protesters. They're saying that that there needs to be a reckoning in America with its history, and that the president has called for these statues to be protected. Now, his critics say that he is merely stoking a culture war in the United States to detract from his handling of the pandemic and the recent polls, which show him trailing behind his Democratic rival Joe Biden. But there are reports saying that the president is making good on his word to protect these statues and symbols. And to quell protests. There's a report in the Chicago Tribune which says that around 150 federal officers are being sent by the Department of Homeland Security to Chicago, which the mayor there has strongly rejected.
Right, Jagriti. And what's also intrigued me today after listening to Donald Trump was the fact that he's comparing the situation to Afghanistan. Moving on, President Trump is also claiming that the Liberal Democrats are letting cities run out of control and that if Joe Biden were to be elected, the whole country would go to hell. Is the BLM now becoming yet another political divide, galvanizing election propaganda?
Well, the protests are really one of those, like the coronavirus pandemic, one of the key battlegrounds really for the campaign and for the upcoming election in November. If you remember, when the protests early on were sweeping across the country, President Donald Trump called those state governors who didn't want the president to bring in the National Guard. He essentially called the state governors who weren't able to control the protests themselves weak, and said that he would deploy the National Guard if the governors weren't able to bring those under control. And this is really a refrain that he's bringing in, and he's pointing to Democrat-run cities. So for many observers, they see this as really an electioneering strategy by the president. Indeed, the city's mayor of Portland tweeted he called the federal presence in Portland political theatre in an election year.
Right, political theatre in an election year. Let's see how this actually pans out. But now, thank you so much, Jagriti, for joining us on this broadcast and sharing your